I'm Bill Atkinson, president of Atkinson Strategic Communications, and I'm here today with Edwin Warfield, founder of Citybiz. And I've been pushing Edwin to do an interview with me for more than a year, and then suddenly our friends at Think Systems were able to coax the publicity-shy Edwin Warfield into an interview. So Edwin, it is great to see you. And today we're going to be talking about CEOs and leadership. This interview will run on Citybiz and also in Think's monthly newsletter, which is loaded with great information for business executives. Edwin, it is spectacular to see you.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, we'll jump right into it. In the course of your lifetime as an editor, reporter, and publisher, you've interviewed, I would say, thousands of CEOs. What, as a keen observer, what are the key traits that you see in great CEOs?
Well, I think there's certain traits that are obvious: vision, grit, courage, decisiveness, self-confidence. But I think real great leaders straddle between opposing forces. When to be patient, when to be impatient, communication versus listening, transparency versus opacity, and vulnerability and versus self-confidence. I think great leadership requires an understanding of the balance, the equilibriums, the calibrations.
All right, thank you for that. So who are some of the people who have impressed you along the way?
Well, it is impossible to choose my favorite people that I've interviewed, but here's some stories that really resonated with me. The first one would be Daniel Lamar, who was the chairman of Cirque du Soleil. And he had written a book earlier this year chronicling the Cirque du Soleil story. And it's a fascinating story between a group of sort of Montreal street performers, and it escalates to their partnerships with the Beatles and James Cameron and Michael Jackson and Disney, and then crashing into COVID and going from $1 billion in revenue to zero revenue. So it's an incredible story. And that was really one of my favorite recent interviews. Another interview that I conducted was Amy King, who's the CEO of Pallet, which is a small home builder that is also a social purpose company. And she's really committed to fighting homelessness at scale. And she's really garnering some significant traction in places like Seattle and Portland. A great story, and I hope she does solve that awful American problem. And then the third interview that I'd like to talk about is Paul Reed Smith, and this is a Bowie story, as in Bowie, Maryland. He came from Bowie. He turned his guitar company into what he described as an American dream. There's one part of the interview that I absolutely loved, where he went backstage to a Carlos Santana, a couple concerts, and just sort his way in there to try to get to Carlos, and Carlos turned him down and said, "Hey, the pickups weren't good," and then ultimately, after he fine-tuned the guitars a couple of years later, he's turned into a significant relationship with Carlos Santana, and it's just again another. I love companies built on passion, and that is a company built on passion, and as he says, it's an American dream in Bowie, Maryland.
Wow. Yeah, that's a fantastic story. I mean, they all are good. You got guitars, you've got a home builder, and you've got entertainers. So nothing tech yet. Are there any interviews that reflect your personal interests?
I think all of them reflect my personal interests, but there are some interviews that I've conducted that are near and dear to me. And I guess one of them was with Greg Hobelman, who is the co-CEO of Ashley Addiction Treatment. And alcohol played a pretty significant role in my father's life until he met Father Martin at Ashley House, and he ultimately graduated. So, yeah, the impact of Father Martin on my father was significant, and really it changed his life and turned his life around. So that was, I enjoyed conducting that interview, and Greg himself had been an alcoholic, so it's, I felt like my father was looking down on that interview. So The next interview that I conducted recently that I want to talk about is Dr. James Min, and he's the CEO of Clearly. Clearly is using AI and image analysis to help prevent heart attacks. 50% of people who suffer a heart attack will do so without experiencing any symptoms. And I'm one of those people. I have had 3 heart-related incidents: a stroke, which that was pretty obvious, an aorta bypass, and a TIA that sent me to the ICU unit. So any way using AI to prevent the situations, my visits to the ICU unit, that's an important company. They've raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and I'm excited to see the progress that they're making. And then the last one, I probably would not have discussed this 4 or 5 years ago, but the interview was with Stephen Willard, who is the CEO of NRX, which produces oral investigational medicine focused on bipolar depression in patients with acute and subacute suicide. And in 2016, I was diagnosed as being bipolar. I was, this is probably 40 years after the original symptoms and manifestations were in place. So again, the mission of NRX is really to help people with bipolar and address their issues. So those are some of the interviews that really reflected my own personal interest, and I continue to try to do interviews in the area of mental health and healthcare.
Yeah. I mean, that's a fantastic slice of the interviews you've done. I think they're really important to go back and listen to, because there's so much great information imparted. All right. So I worked at the Baltimore Sun for 10 years and covered finance and banks and brokerage houses. And during that time, I saw Mercantile Bank was sold, and Allfirst was sold, and Legg Mason later after I left was sold. Alex Brown gone, and USF&G. And I was wondering, what's the job, the way you see it, what's the job of a CEO? Is it to, grow a company and manage it and sell it, or is it to sustain it and, make it part of the fabric of the community?
I think all of the examples that you referenced were, highly compensated managers. They were not founders, they were not entrepreneurs or visionaries. And their commitment was, really limited to their compensation and getting an exit strategy. Regrettably in the banking industry, mergers are inevitable. And it is, I think in each case, Mercantile, I think, could have been a national bank. It had the platform, it had the skill. That was a truly regrettable instance. When Chip Mason handed off the transition to Mark Fetting, there really was a commitment to Baltimore. And I think in bringing in Mark Fetting, who is a Baltimore boy, there was a commitment. Regrettably, there was a hedge fund situation that got out of control. And I think but I think Chip's commitment to Baltimore was reflected by bringing in Mark Fetting. I think in the case of Alex Brown, the timing of their sale was brilliant, and I do think that the Griswold family and Brown Advisory, I think they continue to really make an incredible commitment to Baltimore and nonprofits. So those are my thoughts on the era that you were talking about.
Yeah. It seems like ancient history, but when I was covering them, they were the foundation of the city. Along with Hopkins and University of Maryland Medical, but they were part of the history of the city, and they had created so much wealth and spurred the growth of so many businesses. Fascinating companies for sure, and really the CEOs. I loved covering them, and I had admired them, and every time there was a sale, it was always so shocking and depressing. Give us examples of CEOs who you see doing a good job, building their business, beating the competition, creating some niche, or winning in the face of adversity.
I'm just going to pick two companies. One that I'm just have been a huge fan of, and that is Catalyte. And the founder, I did not interview the founder, Michael Rosenbaum. I interviewed the CEO, Jacob Shu. Michael Rosenbaum, the company it's invested, the major investor is Steve Case, Rise of the Rest. And it's using AI to discover high potential talent, develop and deploy them into client companies. So it's really, the interesting thing about Michael Rosenbaum, he is the most pedigreed. He's got more degrees than anyone on earth, but he's really trying to address those people without degrees. And he's got two companies. He's got Catalyte and he's got Arena. And I think those are important. It's an important company for Baltimore, and it's an important company for Maryland, because I think what the AI, the technology is using, that hopefully he can address unemployment and some of the issues that Baltimore faces. So that's one company. There's another company that, just like myself, my company, I've been pivoting, pirouetting, genuflecting, iterating, for way too long, longer than anyone, and survived. So the company that I want to make reference to it was Stephen Bisbee and eOriginal, and he started that company. And I don't know all the details of the saga, but I interviewed him a few years ago, and it was a 24-year journey it was a digital mortgage startup, probably a little early before DocuSign and the rest of the world. And it raised money, pivoted, crashed, almost burned, and then finally, in 24 years later, it was sold. And just again, his perseverance and his fortitude, just an example of everyone talks about overnight successes, but in this case, it's 2.5 decades.
Yeah, exactly, and that's.
Those are two companies that two interviews that two companies that I love sharing stories.
And those examples, they just show the richness of the Baltimore area and what's out there. So thank you for those. Those are great. And the other thing is, you talked about not an overnight success, and that's what I think most businesses face. It's a fight every day, and you never know when you're going to get hit, but you can bet that it's going to be today or it's going to be tomorrow. So I admire anybody who's an entrepreneur, anybody who's laying it on the line there and trying to build a business. One of the key traits of any great CEO is being a good leader. What does it mean to be a good leader?
I'm not sure if I can answer that question, but I can share some thoughts. I think great leaders have important formative experiences. If you look at the greatest generation, it was World War II, the military, all that structure that came out of that. And so I think that leadership was really a reflection of what came out of World War II and the military. What's interesting to see in America now is that 44% of the Fortune 500 were founded by immigrants or their children. So I think opportunity by itself creates leadership. So I think leadership comes in so many forms. So, but I mean, I think I've always I have a very good bipolar friend that took me a little while to realize that he was bipolar. His name is Mark Twain. So Mark Twain has always got some good thoughts, and he says the really great people make you feel that you too can be great. And I think that's true of leaders. Really good leaders make you feel great. So thank you, Mark.
Yeah. They are, I would say, selfless. It's pushing others up. And, if you're doing the grunt work, you do the grunt work and you push others up. A question, I think you and I were talking a couple weeks ago about what you were reading, and a book that surprised me was Henry Kissinger's book, Leadership. And what have you taken away from that Kissinger's book? And what does he say about leadership?
Well, he tells the story of 6 political leaders: Konrad Adenauer, Charles de Gaulle, Richard Nixon, Edward Sadat, Lee Kuan Yew, and Margaret Thatcher. I've only read 4 of the 4 chapters, but I think it was fascinating. The first chapters were on Konrad Adenauer, who took over Germany at the after World War II, and really, what Kissinger talks about is his strategy of humility. That had to get there's no way that Germany had to be humble given the history of World War II, and I think Adenauer embraced that. So it's Kissinger's he's a fascinating chronicler of history. He's a wonderful writer. I think there's a bit of controversy in the way he handles Nixon. See, he's slightly. But I think he talks about every one of these leaders had sort of a different strategy to get through. For Margaret Thatcher, it's a strategy of conviction. It's been an enlightening book on leadership.
Your family history runs deep in Maryland. I think it was your great-grandfather who was governor in the early 1900s, and your dad was a legislator and also adjutant general. Did you see them in times of crisis, or did you see them have to put on that leadership hat in pivotal times?
I mean, I think I start with my great grandfather, who luckily was born in 1849 and was able to avoid the Civil War, and after that. Obviously, the family enterprise was impacted by that. He went on to have a really broad, encompassing entrepreneurial and political career, and he's always been just to me an incredible role model. He became governor. He started the Daily Record. He founded Fidelity Deposit, and just the breadth of his life has always been an inspiration to me. But really, the one story that I really want to share is. When my father passed away, there was an obituary written by Michael Olesker, and just really sort of an unexpected obituary from Michael Olesker, who we all know can be hard-nosed or not empathetic. And it was a wonderful. The headline sort of embodies the article. It says, during Vietnam protests, Warfield showed compassion. And this was the riots at the University of Maryland. It was just after the deaths in Kent State, and my father was adjutant general and dealing with 2,500 children or college kids that were could have replicated what happened at Kent State. And Dad just I'll share the actual obituary in this interview because it really it was another unique display of leadership based on compassion. Because had he not had that compassion, it could have had a different situation.
Yeah. Did you see him at home? And I'm just curious as to how he was reacting to a situation this intense.
Well, my parents were divorced, and I was sent off to boarding school. So to be honest, I only spent 4 to 6 weeks every year in Maryland, and so this. Regrettably, some of my knowledge is based on reading the Baltimore Sun and anecdotal stories. But so I can't say I was there during this period of time.
Yeah. Okay. As CEO of your own company, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned?
I guess with just keep reading. If you want to learn about leadership, I'm a voracious reader of biographies, business stories, history, strategy. Great lead. If you want to be a great leader, you need to read about other great leaders. You need to read about Lincoln and FDR and Churchill and Gandhi and how they survived their challenges. And again, I hate to bring him up again, but he's my bipolar friend, Mr. Mark Twain. I try never to let my schooling get in the way of my education. So just keep learning. That's those. I don't know if those are the words of wisdom that you're looking for, but
Yeah, that's beautiful, and that's right. Twain is somebody I studied as an English major in college, and how can you not love him? What a witty man and writer, Samuel Langhorne Clemens. Edwin, it has been a pleasure talking to you. It's been great having you on the other side answering questions. And this has been a fascinating interview. And I hope so many people in the Citybiz world get a chance to watch this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill, for your time and for your thoughtful questions.
You're welcome.